Hello and welcome back. Today's video has to do with the freeze trauma response. We're going to learn what is the freeze trauma response, why it happens, what it feels like, how it affects your life, and more importantly, you're going to be able to walk away with 4 tips that are going to help you to know how to start breaking out of the freeze response if you've been stuck in it for a long time. So make sure you watch to the end because that's where I'm going to be leaving those tips. For those that don't know me, my name is Michelle. I'm a trauma-informed coach and a somatic experiencing practitioner. I'm also the founder of the Thrivers School of Transformation, which is a monthly membership where I meet live with people from all over the world every week, and we do the inner work together to work through emotional trauma so that we don't feel like we're stuck or that past trauma is ruining our present life. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you check out my live weekly Zoom meetings. So let's dive in. So when it comes to our freeze response, and actually when it comes to any of our trauma responses, which by the way, we have 4, we have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. In this video, we're only going to be focusing on freeze. Our trauma responses are stored deep in our subconscious minds beyond the scope of our rational, logical, conscious mind. So in other words, we don't choose our trauma responses. I don't say, oh, I'm going to freeze right now because that's what's best for me. No, that takes place in my subconscious mind and without my conscious consent. And that's actually a good thing because our subconscious mind processes 27,500 times the amount of data that the conscious mind can handle. And it acts in a split second. So we definitely want our subconscious helping us with our trauma responses because let's say I'm getting attacked by a vicious animal. And by the time my conscious mind figures something out where it's like, maybe I should do this, should I run, should I hide, what should I do? All that thought being done in my conscious mind, by the time it figures out what to do, I'm dead. Whereas the subconscious mind can act and take in all of that information. It makes an immediate decision based on all the information and data that it just processed in that split second, and it comes to the best conclusion for my circumstance. For example, this is a chart that shows exactly what's going on in our subconscious mind in that split second. The first thing that it asks is, am I safe? Where our conscious mind cares very much about our joy and our passion and our happiness, our subconscious mind really only cares about our safety. There are 2 options, yes or no. If after being startled, it realizes that we're safe, then our body down-regulates and we go back into our parasympathetic state. If, however, the nervous system reaches the conclusion that we are not safe, then our first 2 trauma responses that it goes to are fight and flee. So the nervous system determines, can I win in a fight with whatever's happening? If it determines no, then it goes into flee. Can I run and get away? If that answer is no, then it goes into freeze, which is basically, I'm going to stay still and hope that this problem goes away. And when we're in freeze, it may look like we're still, like there's not a lot going on, but there is so much charge underneath the surface because basically when we are in freeze, what is underneath is the fight and flight energy that came up. The body wanted to fight or flee, but then it couldn't. And so the freeze is holding down all that energy. So there's a lot going on just beneath the surface. So going back to our chart, now I know we're focusing on the freeze response in this video, but just to kind of help you to see all that's going on in the nervous system when you're in danger, if freeze doesn't work, then what will happen next is the body will go into shutdown, where instead of all that energy, the tightness to keep you still, all of a sudden everything goes limp. And it's almost like the body is playing dead. And we've seen the value of this in the animal world, right? Where let's say the gazelle is frozen, hoping the lion doesn't see it. But then the lion starts coming, and so the lion gets it, and now she goes into dorsal vagal shutdown, where the gazelle looks dead in the lion's mouth. So the lion puts it down, and I'm sorry about being so graphic, guys, just to kind of help us to understand these trauma responses. But the lion puts the gazelle down, goes to get its family, and the gazelle jumps up out of dorsal vagal and is able to get away. So each of these responses has a purpose. And there's one trauma response I haven't mentioned yet, and that's the fawn trauma response. The fawn trauma response will often kick on when we are in the same dangerous situation for so long. It's not just a one-time event where the nervous system is like, okay, this is continually happening. What can I do to ensure safety? Okay, I'm going to stifle myself, my needs, my perspectives, my wants, how I see things, my authenticity, to try to make this other person that is creating the danger happy so that I can be safe. Okay, so those are the different trauma responses, and the nervous system reaches which one it wants you to do in an instant. So let's go back to our freeze response. And in the future, I'll be doing videos on the fight, flight, and fawn responses as well. So if you have not already subscribed, make sure you do so and hit that bell icon so you're notified of my upcoming videos. While it's easy to see the benefit of all of these trauma responses in the animal world and how it can help an animal to survive danger, it's not as easy to see the benefit in our lives, because unlike animals, for example, that gazelle that I was talking about, the reason it was able to get up and move on and run and live life as if it had no trauma is because of how it's able to allow the nervous system to discharge that fight, flight, freeze energy so that it can go on with life as if that never happened, right? You never see a gazelle that escaped a lion looking over its shoulder and scared, because the stuck energy from the trauma has been dispersed. Humans, on the other hand, we tend to stifle, we tend to repress, we tend to try to compartmentalize. And so that stuck energy stays in us, and it stays affecting us for a very long time. So for example, if you've been stuck in the freeze response for a long time, here are some ways that it might be showing up. So some physical signs are you might feel constriction and tightness in your body. You might suffer from body aches such as back pain, shoulder pain, hip pain. You may also notice that you breathe in a very shallow way, like you're never able to have just relaxed belly breaths, but you're breathing always from your chest. Or you might even notice that you're always holding your breath. Some emotional signs that you might notice is feeling very numb and detached from your life, disconnected from your body, disconnected from your feelings and your experiences. You might feel paralyzing overwhelm, where you're just so overwhelmed that you can't move. I remember when I was living 24/7 in freeze, and I can remember standing in my kitchen and looking around, and just the thought of having to do the dishes made my body feel as if I was going to be there forever. Like there was so much overwhelm that I would just shut down and feel like I couldn't do anything. Another way that it showed up was feeling detached or disconnected from my emotional states. So if I was talking about the trauma and what happened, I would be like, yes, and I was very angry, and it's very wrong, and this is very horrible, and I'm very sad. And it was like there was no range of emotion that I could feel. And so when you're living like that, you don't really fully feel alive and as if you're living. You just feel like you're surviving. And that's exactly what's happening, because your survival brain is actually now calling all the shots when you're stuck in that trauma response. And so I want to give you one of the first tips that is helpful in starting to break out of freeze. And this tip is coming from what I did wrong. So learn from my mistakes. Okay, when I was stuck in that freeze state, I felt like it was stealing my life. I felt like the things that I loved, I didn't feel anything for anymore. I just felt like a tomb, right? I felt like I had been erased, and it was horrible. It was horrible. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And when I was in that state, and I would see myself showing up as this new Michelle, because it wasn't who I really was, it would be very frustrating. I would get angry at myself. I would hate on myself. My inner dialogue, if you could hear it at those moments, was really, really mean. What I didn't understand at that time was, because I was showing up in response to this freeze with so much rejection, anger, lack of emotional support, hate, shame, blaming, right? So much self-blaming. The part of me that was going into freeze, which was doing so to protect me, suddenly also viewed me as a threat. So at that time, my survival brain was really running my life, and my conscious mind was pissed off about it. The more angry I got, the more the freeze response just stayed strong. Again, viewing me as a threat. And in an arm wrestling match between my subconscious mind and my conscious mind, we know who would win, right? My conscious mind was no match to override what was part of my subconscious mind. So I had to learn how to help myself in a different way. And that's when I learned the importance of really finding the positive intent, even for those protective pieces that I felt were deeply affecting my life in a negative way. And so the first thing we have to learn is that our trauma responses kicked on for a darn good reason. I had to realize there was a time I was in danger. I was going through some really horrible circumstances, and my body, in its innate wisdom, knew what to do to help me at that moment to survive. And when I went from hating, because that's how it felt, I hated that piece of me that I felt was stopping me from living my life. When I went from hating it to appreciating it and seeing its value, it started to soften, and I began to have a different relationship with that piece of me, that protective piece. And I learned that valuable lesson, that we cannot break out of the freeze response through sheer willpower, through simply steamrolling our body and trying to force it to do what we want it to do. We can't shame ourselves into action. We can't beat ourselves even in the confinements of our mind, because those pieces won't budge. But when we change our relationship with them, that's when things really begin to shift. And if you feel like you would like to be able to change your relationship with your protective pieces, but it feels impossible, then I want to invite you to my live weekly Zoom meetings, because that's one of the things we focus on, is really working with our mind and our body together, so that our mind isn't pulling us in one direction and our body is trying to keep us stuck in the past. We learn how to bridge them, bring them together, so that together they can move forward. Now, if you're battling freeze, remember that it might look different for you than it looks for someone else. So for example, it can be quite obvious when you're in freeze. For example, let's say something scary is happening and you literally feel like you can't move. I've had clients tell me, Michelle, I get a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of trauma around social events, and sometimes when I'm out, I feel glued to my chair. I feel like I can't move. So that's an obvious way that freeze can show up. Or it can show up in more covert ways through things like avoidance and overwhelm, where our body just has that paralysis that prevents us from wanting to do anything. Now, regardless of whether it's freeze that's very obvious or very covert, one of the challenges with working with a trauma response is the fact that at one time there was real danger. But now we wind up staying stuck in that trauma response, and in this case, the freeze trauma response, because of perceived danger, not real danger. So for example, if I lived in a chaotic environment in childhood, even if that chaos was not directed at me directly. So for example, let's say I had parents that were always fighting and screaming and yelling, and there was a lot of anger and dirty looks and that kind of an environment. Even if it was just with them. If I didn't have anyone that helped me to co-regulate and feel safe despite what was going on, then as a child, since we can't fight and flee, right, we wind up going into freeze or fawn or swinging back and forth between the two. So at that time, that was real threat to that child, because to the survival brain, if there's that amount of anger and the child doesn't know why, and the child thinks somehow it's their fault, which children do, then the survival brain's like, well, if it's your fault, you're going to be abandoned because you're bad, you're worthless, you're going to be abandoned. And then if you're abandoned at your age, your life is on the line. So that was real threat. And in somatic experiencing, we call that an overcoupling, where two things get put together and it's like they're baked together. So for example, in this case, it's anger with survival. And then as an adult, if that overcoupling is in our nervous system, anytime we see somebody angry, upset, disappointed with us, it could be, I'm in a store and the cashier is angry and having a bad day, and we feel that anger, we can suddenly start feeling ourselves go into freeze. Or in relationships, anytime somebody is disappointed or angry, it really makes us feel unsafe because that overcoupling is in our subconscious mind. And to our nervous system, that story is the same, even though you're not the same. You're not a child anymore. But to the nervous system, that sequence is embedded in your implicit memory, where somebody's angry, that means it's my fault, I'm bad, I'm going to get rejected, abandoned, and then my life is on the line. And so as an adult, it's so fast. Your body reaches the conclusion, my life is on the line, when somebody is just upset or angry. So it's perceived threat. Part of working with the freeze response is helping your nervous system to distinguish between real threat and perceived threat. So here's another tip that can help you when you're working with your freeze response. And it has to do with orienting with your eyes. Orienting is a deceptively simple practice that is really designed to help you to become more present. And that's so important when you're working with freeze, because the parts that are going into freeze are almost like they're in the past. They're still bracing because of a danger that is no longer in the present. And so when we start orienting with our eyes, we start looking around, we start noticing something pleasant to look at, we start seeing our surroundings, we're basically helping our nervous system to say, yes, you're feeling danger. Yes, you're feeling fear, and look around. We're safe. There's peace here. There's calm. There's beauty. There's neutrality. And so as we use our eyes to take in our present environment and conditions, and if these conditions are perceived by our nervous system to be safe, peaceful, neutral, then our body begins to settle out of the charge of panic or fear or anxiety that might be driving the freeze response. Something else that can help when you're in the freeze response is movement. Because think about it, when you're in the freeze response, when you really begin paying attention to your body, you will feel frozen. You will feel like your legs can't move, like they weigh 1,000 pounds, like you can't lift your arms. And so as you start moving your body, slowly tapping your legs, you can start with something simple, tapping your legs, stomping your feet, shaking your hands, standing up and shaking your whole body, starts helping you to get things moving and coming out of the freeze response. Now, quick disclaimer with that tip. If you sense a change in your body, right? You were in freeze, you did some shaking, you did some movement, and now you don't feel freeze, that's wonderful. And that's the purpose of that. But don't forget to do the work to find out what is driving you into the freeze response. Otherwise, you can fall into the habit of just working on symptoms, working on the freeze response from a symptom level. You feel freeze, you shake, it's gone. You feel freeze again, you shake, it's gone. But what's driving it is still there. And the last tip I'd like to give for this video is to learn how to complete a fight or flee response in the body. And we do that in a somatic experiencing session when we slow things down and we let our body move in the way it would have wanted to move in fight or flee. Now, I don't have time to go into doing that exercise at this moment, but my next video will be about how to do that exercise. So again, if you are not subscribed, make sure you do so and hit that bell icon so that you know when that video is up. Last reminder, if you've been working on trauma, working through cptsd recovery, and you've been watching videos for a long time and still feel stuck, or you're watching the information and you're struggling with how to put it into practice, make sure you check out my live Zoom meetings, because they're a place where you can get the information, ask questions, get group coaching, as well as somatic experiencing sessions, EFT, trauma release breathwork, all at the same time for only $79.99 a month. So don't forget to check it out if you're looking to dive deeper.